and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. The NATO Summit in Ankara comes at a defining moment for the alliance. From the war in Ukraine and growing instability in the Middle East to increasing competition between major powers, NATO is facing its most complex security environment in decades. The agenda has been dominated by several major developments. Allied leaders are reviewing how to turn last year's landmark defense spending commitments into concrete military capabilities, while NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte has called for increased defense production, stronger industrial cooperation and continued support for Ukraine. Turkey has emerged as one of the central players at the summit. President of Turkey Recep Tayyip Erdogan has urged NATO allies to remove restrictions on defense industry cooperation, announced additional investment in Turkey's Steel Dome air defense system, and reaffirmed Ankara's commitment to reaching NATO's 5% defense spending target by 2030. This summit has also been marked by renewed momentum in US-Turkey relations. President Donald Trump signaled that Washington is prepared to lift sanctions on Turkey and reconsider Ankara's return to the F-35 fighter jet program, moves that could significantly reshape NATO's defense landscape if implemented. Beyond the official agenda, the discussions in Ankara carry broader geopolitical implications. They will influence transatlantic relations, Europe's security architecture, the future of support for Ukraine, and the strategic balance across the Black Sea, the Middle East, and the South Caucasus. So, has the Ankara summit strengthened NATO's unity, and what message do today's decisions send to both NATO's partners and its rivals? Let's discuss. Joining me now are Teresa Jorge Fernandes, expert in international relations from Lisbon, Portugal, and also joining me today is Melih Demirtas, former diplomat from Ankara, Turkey. Dear experts, great to have you both on Inside Politics today. And Melih, let's start with a question to you. Before we discuss the individual announcements, I would like to take a step back. Looking at the Ankara summit as a whole, what do you believe was its defining message? Was it primarily about Russia and Ukraine, or did it reveal that NATO is entering a fundamentally new strategic era?
Hello, first of all, Ms. Lavrina, and thank you again for having this invitation. It's also a critical and important time, yes, for Turkey, for Ankara. We just saw that this 2 days also defined something. I mean, growth still shining for Turkey. I mean, as an important partner of course, United States, of NATO. But for the region, for the regional diplomacy, or for peaceful environments in a broader region, I mean Eurasia, I think we can say, or we can speak like half-half, because to be fully optimistic, I think it is too early to talk. Yes, as you asked, the summit started, I think, with the discussion of this Russian-Ukrainian war. But I think just today, I think in the morning, Mr. Trump's, flash declaration about Iran, just everything maybe can start again. I mean, the attacks and United States responses, of course, Iranian responses. I think something starts to be still so tense and still so, I think, non-diplomatic. Although, I mean, the general picture seems to be so positive. I mean, since I think from the coming of this airport images yesterday in Ankara, we see as the important alliance picture between, of course, Mr. Trump and Mr. Erdogan. All the leaders are here. This is, of course, the important time for world diplomacy, security diplomacy of Eurasia, of Middle East. Because of this, I think many leaders also know this, but we also somehow feel that an important problematic still stands on, like between Spain and the United States, between, of course, Italy and United States because of this personal relationship. Germany has some important, I think, stands still in front of all these policies. And some other, of course, for actors from Eastern Europe, Baltics, they have some grievances. And we can say we must still talk about some important problematics between this, alliance, especially constituent elements. In the final declaration also, I just looked at just 1 hour ago, and saw some important articles that must be also discussed. Maybe in your future question, we can discuss them. But still, for Turkey, yes, it is a game. It is a diplomatic important success. But for regional and world diplomacy, I think we have a road to go, and I hope still this road will be positive, at least in this point of the diplomacy.
Well, Teresa, throughout his press conference, Secretary General Mark Rutte repeatedly stressed one phrase: implementation. He argued that NATO has already made the political commitments, and now the challenge is delivering on defense spending, industrial production, and military capability. Does this suggest that NATO no longer sees political unity as its biggest challenge, but rather its ability to deliver?
So first of all, thank you for having me on your show. It's nice to speak with both of you. So in terms of the summit itself, there is something very important for me to focus on, I think, at the moment. It's something that was reproduced also by Mark Rutte, when he did mention in his address that in order to keep as a transatlantic element of NATO, NATO needs to be more European. And this was said by the Ministry of Defense of Germany. So I think this is the main focus right now. Europe has initiatives such as the Readiness 2030, has the PESCO, has the European Defence Fund, has CARD, has many initiatives like SAFE particularly. That's very, very important. 150 billion that are being mobilized, thank you, much better now, that are being mobilized in order for the defense industry bases of Europe to be strengthened, with 65% of components coming from a European Union origin and 35% coming from external partners from European Union. For example, Canada is a very important point in this regard, the Ukraine as well. So in this sense, the alliance is in fact expanding and making sure that the pledge that was done at The Hague last year is being implemented. I will also remind two things. This target of 5%, which Spain is out of, Spain committed to 2.1% spending until 2035. This is a deadline that has 10 years to be achieved. There will be a review done in 2029. So that will be another test moment. Donald Trump will no longer be at the White House at the time. So this is also important for us to keep in mind. And the other thing is that the initiative that the European Union has developed with the ReArm program and the White Plan for European Readiness, this is to achieve strategic autonomy until 2030. So Europe is not going for a full-on independence. No actor can act alone, and this includes the United States, although the American president does not see it this way. But no actor in the global shape of affairs can act isolated. So the idea is to establish strategic autonomy. What does this mean? This means that there will be a closer articulation with the industry, not just at the European level, but also with the Canadian government, the Canadian industry, the American industry, and strengthen, in fact, the transatlantic defense base. We should not look at this as a European industry base isolated on itself. It does need to be reinforced, but the focus here on NATO is the transatlantic security. And that is being done with Ukraine as well. So I think the eyes now, besides all these things that we have been mentioning, the investments that have been made, the delivery capabilities of the allies, there will be a very big focus on the capacity to produce anti-defense air systems in Ukraine. This is something that the Ukrainians are in fact needing. And President Zelensky had a very interesting address today where he pledged a very important case, which is if us Ukrainians developed by ourselves capabilities to stop 90% of missiles coming from Russia, and we need to remember that these are multi-types of missiles. So we have cruise, we have hypersonic, we have several others as well that go at different speeds. They have different impact capabilities. If they can deter 90% of these missiles, why are they not in NATO? We know the answer to that, because that is a red line for Vladimir Putin. But it does make a strong case for not just Europeans, but the transatlantic relation to not have Ukraine inside of NATO. What can NATO do in this sense? Extend security guarantees. And this is, of course, something that Donald Trump will be speaking
That's indeed very interesting,
about.
and we will absolutely come back. That was one of my questions for our further discussions. But
sorry,
as for now,
I anticipated
no worries.
myself.
It's indeed very interesting details. You provided security concern which exists in a number of countries, the coordination. But coming back to our region, coming back to Turkey, Melih, Turkey was unquestionably one of the most visible players at this summit. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan secured high-profile meetings, pushed for closer defense cooperation with allies, renewed momentum on the F-35 issue, and positioned Turkey at the center of NATO's strategic agenda. Looking beyond the headlines, what did Turkey actually gain from hosting this summit, and could this mark the beginning of a new phase in Ankara's influence within the alliance?
This is the critical question of this meeting, Ms. Lavrina. And yes, maybe for the bilateral relations, the United States and Turkey's relation, yes, it is the gain. I mean, in my first response, maybe this bilateral thing is, again, an important issue also in the Turkish press, in this regional, maybe press agencies. We all see the headlines. I think from our entrance in 1952, we always, I think, struggle to be an actor who really strives, who really motivates to maybe have some influence of this balanced politic, I mean, stability issue of Turkish foreign policy. Because of this, we need some help, of course, for our industry, for our military capabilities. And usually, in these last 80 years, we got this help mostly, I think, from the United States. It is not a secret. I mean, from our jets to our military equipments to some sensitive, of course, security arrangements. We had many issues collaborated with United States officials and agencies. But I think after some also domestic problems, after very undeniable facts that in this last maybe 10 years we had with the United States in the problematic level, we also, I think, discovered that independence is an issue. Independence is an issue which is also so important for many actors, as our brother country Azerbaijan knows very well. The other actors, I mean, in the region, Eurasia, know very well. Because of this, we also did, I think, something for our industry. First of all, starting from defense and military industry, and I think from other sectors, we really struggled to our best. But still, United States has this undeniable, maybe priority in some of these technologies, in military, I mean, sense, in this defense sector. Because of this, these jets, equipments, especially for Khan, as a prestige project still, we must have this cooperation. But it is a must, or it is maybe an interim projection. We will see. But for this now, I think United States and Turkey collaboration, it's a defining moment. Because also Mr. Trump knows that in his first presidency, he did, I think, something not in a positive shape for this Turkish-American relations. We all know that because of some crisis atmosphere. Also, domestic politics of Turkey is, affected so negatively. But after that date, I think in the second presidency, we see much more rational, I mean, quote unquote, or positive Trump figure. I mean, especially vis-a-vis this, the other European maybe partners. And after that date, maybe this NATO starts to be also a defining moment in Turkish-United States relations, although Mr. Trump continues to criticize NATO so harshly. Also today, if you look at maybe some headlines, Mr. Trump really gave some very strong messages to some alliance partners. But he always also repeats that I'm here, I'm in Ankara because of Mr. Erdogan, I mean, the invitation of the Turkish president. It is the bilateral relation, Ms. Lavrina. But with this bilateral relation, a unity, a security architecture can go and can flourish in a strong way. I have, and some, of course, analysts have important question marks. Because the world's changing, but I'm not sure that NATO can change so rapidly as the world, as the region, because Russia, China, Iran, these actors cannot be, kept in a very, outside zone. Also, President Erdogan said today that these actors are not only the enemy, quote unquote, actors of some documents. Also in NATO document today, in the final document, we see some, reference to Russian, zone. But I think this is not the first interest of Turkey, especially in such a geography where everything can change in one night, in 1 week. We must be careful. Also, NATO partners must be careful. I think it is not the Cold War time anymore.
Absolutely. Teresa, another striking moment came when Mark Rutte described the recent US strikes on Iran as absolutely necessary. Traditionally, NATO has tried to avoid being drawn directly into Middle Eastern conflicts. Do these remarks indicate a broader strategic shift in how the alliance views security beyond Europe?
That's a great question, Anastasia. If I can just steal less than 2 minutes, maybe 1 minute, on the question that you did before, and I think there's something important to mention here. So we know that the Ukrainians are desperately needing of the Patriot system, which is an anti-air defense missile system that is produced by the Americans, and the Americans are struggling to produce these at the same or higher rate than they're being spent in the Middle East. I promise I'll go back to the Middle East on NATO. I just have a very quick point, which is in terms of the bilateral agreements that are made, the European Union, and especially two partners in particular, we're talking about France and Italy, they are developing an anti-air defense system, which is called the SAMP. SAMP, and this is not being mentioned in the news because it's not really something that is up to selling at this moment. It's still under production, and Turkey was one of the investors in this project, and the first 8 batteries of these systems have been promised to the Ukrainians. So this is something that's also very important to focus on, because I think, and I hope as well, that soon enough we will see a system that is able to deter long-range missiles similar to the Patriots, but being produced on a European Union level. Now, I also think that one of the things that will concern, especially the Israelis, if we're talking about the Middle East, is if in fact if Turkey goes back to the F-35 program, which was removed from due to the acquisition of the defense systems that are produced by the Russians. So I think that this will also be an interesting point of tension that could happen in the Middle East, depending on how the situation goes. I think that the lifting of sanctions is, of course, essential to keep the unity of the alliance and also make sure that we bring Turkey closer to the European center. But we'll see what happens with the F-35s. Now, what we can deduct from the situation in the Middle East that is now warming up. NATO will always be a defensive alliance, and the main pillars of European defense were very vocal about their, I don't want to say inability because that's the wrong word, but they are not willing to join the US on an offensive measure, especially when they were not really consulted before the US did these strikes in the Middle East. So we're talking about Spain, of course, the most vocal element and the element that is compromised with less percentage of investment of its GDP until 2035. We're talking about Italy. As we know, Trump has been very critical of Meloni, especially at the G7 summit, where he posted in his Truth Social that Meloni begged for a picture. I don't think this is a very nice way of doing diplomacy, especially at this level. And he's also very critical of the UK, very critical of France. But all the coalition of the willing, they were very practical and very direct, and they were very consistent mostly when they said that they are not opposed to joining the intervention, but that they would do so when security measures allowed and on a defensive level. So they would contribute with the removal of the mines, they would contribute with restoring order to the region. And this is, of course, what is not happening because Iran is bombing cargo ships and with gas and petrol tankers at the Strait of Hormuz on the Omani side. So there were always two channels. This has always been the case. We just have to look at the geography of the strait itself. So what Iran is doing here is just making sure with bombing, which is of course concerning, that the vessels take the route that was designated in fact by Iran. And there is of course the likely probability that they will apply sanctions after the 60 days. And we don't even know if the 60 days still holds, right? Because the US Treasury Department just removed the waiver for Iran.
Absolutely. That's my next question to Melih. President Trump said at the Ankara summit that in his view the ceasefire with Iran is over, while also saying he will still allow negotiators to continue talks. How should NATO allies read this contradiction? As pressure diplomacy, a signal of imminent escalation, or evidence that Washington itself has not yet decided between military force and diplomacy?
Of course, it is an unexpected or maybe non-desired diplomacy style, Mr. Lavrina. We know Mr. Trump. He is a different, maybe I always call in my articles, a postmodern style of Machiavellian politician style. I mean, also realist, he knows the national interest, but also too postmodern to be a, very silent diplomat, because we all know that diplomats are always so silent. Like the foxy style we always calling in quote unquote. Unfortunately, this also brings new wars, new realpolitik, new loss of civilian lives in the world since the World War I. We know that diplomacy has many gaps in the world. First of all, European diplomacy. We know that Europeans are really made something very wrongly, starting from, of course, Germany, but the other countries also have some important faults, from colonial and other attempts, and still the world, shake because of all these failures of some continents. Mr. Trump just repeated these words against Iran, yes, and I think it is not, of course, what Turkey wants to hear, in such a level of multilateral diplomacy, because it is not a war, like my other colleague in Portugal said that just Iranian bombed some shores and some ships. I think maybe we must not forget that such a war has already started, 3 years ago by an actor who is so belligerent, who is so violent, which is Israel. It's whose also actions is also, recognized by United Nations several times as genocide. And I think as the continuing action of this, series of war, I think Iran was, selected as the new target by United States and by Israel. Iran is not member of NATO. I am not from Iran, but I can understand as an independent, a scholar or researcher, that independent country has also a right to defend itself. And now, I think, if a NATO is created for Iran, Iran is also a defensive position, I think, nowadays. Of course, it used this Strait of Hormuz, it used also these civilian passages, but also Mr. Trump always repeats that I am the sole guarantor, I am the sole maybe protector of the world economy, although he started something, 5 months ago against this region. These regions is affected, Ms. Lavrina, as you know, very negatively. Also Turkish economy, also Gulf countries. Also the Asian, even this summer times, all this, Chinese, Russian economy, also the European partners affected very well. I don't know the other side of the ocean. We have a very big ocean, as Mr. Zelensky said once, between United States and this side of the world. Because of this, I think Mr. Trump used this advantage several times, as the United States used it in the world wars. But we must be optimistic for diplomacy. Although Mr. Trump knows his style, he knows also that diplomacy is still going on. I think they will return the table, thanks to maybe the mediation of Pakistan, Qatar, some other actors. We are hopeful, but of course we must be hopeful that Russia or China or other actors must also stabilize Iran. The other side of the world, quote unquote, must not maybe react as some NATO maybe members want to react, because it will be maybe the end, right, especially of such a peaceful environment, of such a peaceful maybe humanity, especially at this level of this maybe progress. Because, even in the documents, some nuclear weaponry are mentioned. It is so frightening, Islam. Because absolutely, if you look at the final document of NATO, I am really so sad to see that NATO, in such a multilateral platform, said we had a combination of weaponry, which is like nuclear, conventional, even artificial intelligence. But I think as the member of NATO in Turkey, I am so sad that the other side of the world are also so fast in developing something, like China, Russian, and the other world countries. And such a world cannot, I think, be peaceful. And we are actually, from the side of this independence, research, and scholarship, are a bit pessimistic because of this.
And Teresa, unfortunately, we are running out of time. So very briefly, if I may ask one last question about Ukraine, which remained one of the central issues at the Ankara Summit. But the discussion focused less on immediate membership, as you already mentioned, more on air defense, ammunition, and long-term military support. Does this mean NATO is quietly shifting from the question of when Ukraine joins to how Ukraine survives and strengthens now?
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. If I can just on 20 seconds, I don't think that this war started 5 months ago. I think this war started the minute that the United States removed itself from the JCPOA. So if we have to, just to correct my previous argument or to make it very, very clear, I think that this all started there. But going now back to Ukraine, I think that if Ukraine does go into NATO, this would be seen by the Russians as a provocation. So when we saw that Sweden and Finland joined 2023, 2024, Vladimir Putin's reaction was already quite apprehensive, and the Kremlin did see this as an extension of the European umbrella and the transatlantic umbrella of security. If Ukraine did join, Zelensky does make a good case when he speaks about the capability to defend against airstrikes and also their Ukrainian drone capacities. But joining Ukraine on a basis of the Washington Treaty, the way it is drafted, and the conditions that we see on the terrain itself, it would benefit the alliance, certainly, but it would antagonize the Russians even more. So I think that if, in fact, the goal here is to bring both parties, Vladimir Putin, Zelensky, to the table to discuss peace negotiations, this would just antagonize the Kremlin further, which is already in a delicate position. And it's very hard for the Russians to understand diplomatic negotiations if they don't feel, and they are not, in the upper hand situation. So I think that the articulation for now will in fact be with security guarantees, with the allocation of very defensive systems, and not so much with the process of including Ukraine in NATO. And this is something that I see with great sorrow, because I am prone expanding NATO to Ukraine. But the circumstances in the terrain, unfortunately, given what we know, are not the best at the moment for that to happen.
Well, dear experts, we will definitely follow the developments in the regions and far beyond. Thank you so much for joining Inside Politics today. That was indeed a real pleasure to talk with both of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. Have a good day.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this edition of Inside Politics. Today we were joined by Teresa Duarte Fernandes, expert in international relations from Lisbon, Portugal, and Melih Demirtas, who is a former diplomat and political analyst from Ankara, Turkey. Many thanks to both of our guests for sharing their valuable insights and perspectives on the outcomes of the NATO summit in Ankara and the broader implications for Euro-Atlantic security. And thank you for watching us. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina, and I see you next time.